Hello, I'm Melissa Harris, and in honor of Banned Books Week, I will be reading a small piece from The Lovely Bones. I talked so that I would not have to take in his knowledge. Mr. Harvey was no character. He made me feel skeevy and icky now that he was blocking the door. Mr. Harvey, I really have to get home. Take off your clothes. What? Take your clothes off, Mr. Harvey said. I want to check that you're still a virgin. I am, Mr. Harvey, I said. I want to make sure. Your parents will thank me. My parents? They only want good girls, he said. Mr. Harvey, I said, please let me leave. You aren't leaving, Susie. You're mine now. Fitness was not a big thing back then. Aerobics was barely a word. Girls were supposed to be soft, and only girls we suspected were butch could climb the ropes at school. I fought hard. I fought as hard as I could not to let Mr. Harvey hurt me, but my hard as I could was not hard enough, not even close, and I was soon lying on the ground, in the ground, with him on top of me, panting and sweating, having lost his glasses in the struggle. I was so alive then. I thought it was the worst thing in the world to be lying flat on my back with a sweating man on top of me, to be trapped inside the earth and have no one know where I was. I thought of my mother. My mother would be checking the dial of the clock on her oven. It was a new oven, and she loved that it had a clock on it. I can time things to the minute, she told her own mother, a mother who couldn't care less about ovens. She would be worried, but more angry than worried at my lateness. My father, he would pull into the garage, and she would rush about fixing him a cocktail, a dry sherry, and put on an exasperated face. You know junior high, she would say. Or, maybe it's spring fling. Abigail, my father would say, how can it be spring fling when it's snowing? Having failed at this, my mother might rush Buckley into the room and say, play with your father, while she ducked into the kitchen and took a nip of sherry for herself. Mr. Harvey started to press his lips against mine. They were blubbery and wet, and I wanted to scream, but I was too afraid and too exhausted from the fight. I had been kissed once by someone I liked. His name was Ray, and he was Indian. He had an accent, and he was dark. I wasn't supposed to like him. Clarissa called his large eyes with their half-closed lids freakadelic. But he was nice and smart, and helped me cheat on my algebra exam while pretending he hadn't. He kissed me by my locker the day before we turned in our photos for the yearbook. When the yearbook came out at the end of the summer, I saw that under his picture he had answered the standard "My heart belongs to" with Susie Salmon. I guess he had had plans. I remember that his lips were chapped. Don't, Mr. Harvey, I managed, and I kept saying that one word a lot, don't. And I said please a lot, too. Franny told me that almost everyone begged please before dying. I want you, Susie, he said. Please, I said. Don't, I said. Sometimes I combine them. Please don't, or don't please. It was like insisting that a key works when doesn't, or yelling, I've got it, when a softball goes sailing over into the stands. Please don't. But he grew tired of hearing me plead. He reached into the pocket of my parka and balled up the hat my mother had made me, smashing it into my mouth. The only sound I made after that was the weak tinkling of bells. As he kissed his wet lips down my face and neck and then began to shove his hands under my shirt, I wept. I began to leave my body. I began to inhabit the air and the silence. I wept and struggled so I would not feel. He ripped open my pants, not having found the invisible zipper my mother had artfully sewn into their side. Big white panties, he said. I felt huge and bloated. It felt like a sea in which he stood and pissed and shat. I felt like the corners of my body were turning in on themselves and out, like in Cat's Cradle, which I played with Lindsay, just to make her happy. He started working himself over me. Susie! Susie! I hear my mother calling. Dinner's ready! He was inside me. He was grunting. We're having string beans and lamb. I was the mortar. He was the pestle. Your brother has a new finger painting, and I made apple crumb cake. Mr. Harvey made me lie still underneath him. and listened to the beating of his heart and the beating of mine. How mine skipped like a rabbit, and how his thudded, a hammer against cloth. We lay there with our bodies touching, and as I shook, a powerful knowledge took hold. He had done this thing to me, and I had lived. That was all. I was still breathing. I heard his heart. I smelled his breath. The dark earth surrounding us smelled like what it was, moist dirt where worms and animals live their daily lives. I could have yelled for hours. I knew he was going to kill me, but I did not realize then that I was an animal, already dying. "Why don't you get up?" Mr. Harvey said as he rolled to the side and then crouched over me. His voice was gentle, encouraging, a lover's voice on a late morning, a suggestion, not a command. I could not move. I could not get up. When I would not, was it only that I would not follow his suggestion? He leaned to the side and felt over his head across the ledge where his razor and shaving cream sat. He brought back a knife, unsheathed. It smiled at me, curving up in a grin. He took the hat from my mouth. "Tell me you love me," he said. Gently. I did. The end came anyway.